This week on the 77% Street Debate.
The minority in our country, obviously being the white people, are feeding us.
Africa and South Africa, it belongs to the Bantu people. It belongs to the Ngunis. The land must go back to the chiefs. Land must be expropriated without compensation.
I am a farmer. I've been doing that for 5 years commercially, and I operate on leased land for 5 years. So for me, this is a process that it might not fix everything, but it will get me into the playing field.
Yeah. If there is today a blanket expropriation happening, they will still not give you the land. If the ANC was in any way serious about giving black people land, I have no problem. They should give black people land.
The government doesn't trust black people with land in this country, and that's evidenced by the millions of title deeds that are held in backlogs.
South Africa has a new law which basically gives the government the framework on how they can acquire private property from individuals, sometimes with no compensation. Obviously, that's got tongues wagging and hairs crossed. So what does it mean for South Africans, particularly young ones? So I want to start with some farmers. And Gugulethu, we are on your farm right now. How did you receive the news, or what do you take of this new law?
There is a lot to discuss when it comes to this law. It is very touching for a lot of the youth. Because one, it opens a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors for a lot of us. But at the same time, there's a lot in terms of agriculture on how it really does affect, because the minority in our country, obviously being the white people, are feeding us on a day-to-day basis.
What do you mean when you say feeding us?
In terms of the number of farmers that there are, the white farmers are a very small group, yet the numbers that they're able to achieve in terms of production of food are feeding South Africa and even the Sub-Sahara.
Okay, so let me speak to Tevi here, because you are the white farmer that is being discussed here, right? So for you, how do you take it? Because the government is trying to sell this as a kind of land reform act, and we'll get to the details shortly. But what's your take?
So the main thing to realize is, I believe that property rights and the guaranteed property rights in a country is part of the constitution. And in every country in this world where property rights has been taken from people, that country has started to become a third world country. Now, South Africa is definitely on its way to that, and I believe this could be the last nail in the coffin. So it's very important.
So let me come back to something you've said. You think South Africa is well on its way to becoming a third world country?
Yes, definitely. We can just look at a crime which affects us all. 27,000 murders a year. That is comparable to the third world countries in the world. South Africa is among the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world.
Okay, so coming back to the issue of this expropriation law, I just want to come to you, Bulelwa. How do you see the law?
I think it's important to first set out what the Expropriation Act is not. Mm-hmm. The Expropriation Act has nothing to do with land reform. Now, what this act introduces is that it's a balancing act between the interests of the public and the interests of the landowner.
Yeah.
So it makes provision for just and equitable compensation, where they look at the history of the acquisition of the property, they look at the state investment, have there been any improvements? And what it does, which I think is what has gotten people in a frenzy, is that it introduces very few instances where expropriation can happen without compensation.
Okay, so before we talk about the compensation issue, Martin here is already shaking his head no. I'm curious to know what exactly you're disagreeing with. Can we agree, first of all, that expropriation has nothing to do with land reform?
This act is not a land reform law, and the difference is that successful countries, Germany, the United States, United Kingdom, Switzerland, South Korea, Japan, etc., all have a very wide degree of deference to owners when expropriating their property. The government says sorry to you by paying you market or above compensation. Now in South Africa, and this is what I was disagreeing about, is that it's not a small list of circumstances in which the government can now seize your property, confiscate your property without paying you a cent. So if you own fixed property anywhere in the country, a house, a business, a warehouse, a farm, and the government says, we think in the public interest we have to take this without paying you a cent, it is allowed to do that. That is inconsistent with the Constitution.
Okay, so I want to hear from Una here, because your view is actually quite different. Not only do you believe that expropriation needs to happen, you think it needs to happen across the board without compensation.
Exactly, that's correct. Because when you trace the history of South Africa, when you look at the situation of South Africa, my good sir was speaking about crime here. Crime is a result of poverty, and poverty was engineered in South Africa and Africa as a whole. What happened is that in 1652, when the settler arrived here, from that period up until the period of 1910, the land of our people was taken away on grounds that, no, this land is not used. The other one, they said, no, this land it's not being used for anything. So they actually expropriated it without compensation. And actually, when they expropriated it, they were using violence. Okay, that was the nature of colonialism. And then our people ended up in a situation whereby they were forced now to go and work. That land, what it did, 67% of the population of South Africa was allocated to only 7% of the land of South Africa.
Let me just bring our global audience into perspective here. The Native Lands Act is what basically was aligned with apartheid. Black and people of color could not own land. And so before we go on so deep into history, you've taken us back to the 17th century. Yes. In that case, shouldn't everybody leave the property to the Khoisan, who are thought to be the native occupants of South Africa?
No, actually, Africa and South Africa, it belongs to the Bantu people. It belongs to the Ngunis. So it belongs to the people of Africa.
What about Teve here?
We are not saying it doesn't belong here. Now that we are living together here, our perspective is that the land must go back to the chiefs, the traditional leaders, and the state. We are unapologetic about this. Mm-hmm. Land must be expropriated without compensation, because this thing of wasting taxpayers' money, buying land that has been stolen.
Okay, we'll come to those details later. I just want to get your response real quick.
I believe the biggest problem in South Africa currently is the government. And if they expropriate the land in a blanket way, every portion of land, every hectare of land, do you know how many hectares of land currently the government owns in South Africa? Lying bare and wasted. That was bought from white farmers. If the ANC was in any way serious about giving black people land, I have no problem. They should give black people land. They should get black people to farm on that land. And there's a lot of Bophuthatswana, for instance, is 4 million hectares. That's lying bare. If they were really serious about empowering black farmers, they would have given them that farm. They would have given them title deeds. But if there is today a blanket expropriation happening, they will still not give you the land.
Okay, I'm hearing Bulelwa behind me here. Are you the one who was muttering?
Yes, he made a statement that there is a blanket expropriation. That is not the case in South Africa. In this new act of 2025, it's more difficult for government to prove that land is expropriated. There are about 7 or 8 stages that the government must prove. So my argument is that there should not be any fear-mongering around the Expropriation Act, because actually the landowners' rights are even more protected than ever before.
Let me hear from Martin, actually, because that's your interpretation. And Martin, you seem to think that the law is actually now contravening the Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Act says that when the government deems it in the public interest, there are examples, but generally in the public interest, the government may take property without paying anything. This specific government has a long history since the 1990s of depriving people of private property. One cannot look at this Act in isolation. Look at the safeguards, which, of course, they are there, and it's better with them there than not there.
So
but it's not.
You've mentioned safeguards. Do you not trust that they will be upheld?
No. I mean, it comes down to these are formalities. And again, it's better that they are there than they aren't. Okay. But unfortunately, most South Africans, and that includes relatively wealthy South Africans, do not have the money when they've now parted with their property. There goes the minister with their farm or their warehouse. And now they have to pay a lawyer, they have to go to court, and they have to spend sometimes a decade in court fighting the expropriation to get their market-based compensation or any compensation whatsoever. No one can really afford it except the creme de la creme of the 1%, and very few people fit in that bracket.
Okay, let me speak to Komotso here, who is also a farmer. And when you hear, first of all, the conversation that's going on so far, what's your reaction? How do you feel about it?
I am a farmer. I've been doing that for 5 years commercially, and I operate on leased land for 5 years. So my challenge is, if I've been farming for 5 years commercially with a very good track record, how come I do not have access to land when my neighbor has got 1,000 hectares of land that is just sitting there? So for me, we need to...
Sorry, let's just go back a little bit, because we don't all understand how acquisition of property works in this country. What are the steps?
So for example, I would go and look for a farm that I'm interested in. And to my shock, everything is overly priced. And in my opinion, it's overly priced because the normal guy like me is not supposed to be able to afford to buy that piece of land. So my next logical thing to do was to lease. I've been leasing a land for 5 years. I still can't get finance for land because I need to put up security. I don't have security. My neighbor owns 100 or 1,000 hectares of land, and I'm operating on a leased 3.5 hectare farm, 5 years commercially and successful at that matter. So for me, this whole process makes it easy for people like me to be able to get the foot at the door, because what then happens is it tips the scales. So the play field is not leveled. So for me, this is a process that it might not fix everything, but it will get me into the playing field.
Yeah. Wow, Makoni, I want to hear your perspective a little bit, because you are also of the opinion that this is not at all about land reform. So if it's not, what will be?
No, I absolutely agree with Bulelo and Martin that this is not about land reform. I think that is the issue with the land reform system as it currently stands, is it's deeply cynical about providing black people with land. The government doesn't trust black people with land in this country. And that's evidenced by the millions of title deeds that are held in backlogs by the state. In fact, in November of 2024, the Minister of Human Settlements said that between the years 2029 and 2024, they had the target of clearing 1 million title deeds away from the state, finally into the hands of South Africans. How many of those have been achieved today? Only 100,000, less than 10%. That is what I'm speaking about when I say there's a cynical distrust of giving black people access to land.
Okay.
There is a point of contention.
Just before we continue, let me see, by show of hands, do you agree with what Makoni is saying? Do you believe, if you believe that the government trusts black people with land, raise your hand. Not a single person.
Look, there is that whole notion of, if I'm going to give you land, are you actually going to use it? I come from an area in Brits. He spoke about Brits. That's my hometown. There was a huge land claim that was done. Yes, land was given to people, but the land is not being used. Why? There's problems like there's no resources. So that you can be given 10 hectares of land, but with no resources to use that land, with no help to actually get training to actually go and actually make that land productive, it's actually useless. My dad is one of the people that actually got that land that was claimed. Because he didn't have the resources to use the land, he actually resorted to leasing the land to another person who happens to be a white farmer. You're not going to believe this. A whole 15 hectares for 6,000 rand every 6 months.
So the land was restituted back to your father. He was unable to make it productive, and so he had to rent it out to a white farmer who had the resources.
Yes.
Wow, okay. So let me speak to Tavi again, because as a farmer, I mean, before we even started, you were telling me how you had to deal with your cattle, and these are just farmer problems that I'm familiar with, right? So is it fair for people to characterize you as the wealthy white farmer who gets access to loans? Is that true, first of all?
No, that's not true, first of all. So the main thing I think a lot of people don't realize is if you have a farm, the land, the bank holds your title. 2/3 of that farm is already owned by the bank. And if I have 1 year where harvesting isn't good, like last year, I have to go again, now it's 100%. I don't own nothing. I'm just leasing that land from a bank. And a lot of white farmers that people think are rich are actually not that rich. I know of guys that have the biggest farms, thousands of hectares. And you think, wow, these guys are rich. But they have 200 million worth of debt. And the property is also about 200 million. So that guy is actually dirt poor. So I think people really need to realize that. And Khomotso, I want to tell you, well done. That's really difficult to stay on that farm and to continuing. I can just imagine that. But I just want to add something to you. I understand you have the big neighbor with 1,000 hectares. And in my area, I'm not a big farmer as well. I have the same problem, I have to tell you. Whenever I go out and I try to lease a land, one day I dream of buying another piece. The big guys around me is going to check. I have no chance. I have no chance to buy or lease because they are bigger, they have more money than me. They can do this exact same thing that with me than with you, even though I might have a little bigger portion than you right now.
Okay. So let me just ask you a point blank question. Do you think that the land rights in this country are equitable across the board? So if you were to wake up tomorrow as a black man, would you be comfortable with the way the laws are?
You can't trust the ANC government whenever they tell you, I promise you, we will not come and take your land one day.
Okay.
They have proven beyond a shadow of doubt over the years they can't be trusted.
All right. Let me come back to Una here because he's referring to the ANC government, which you're not a part of. You're part of the MK Youth League. But the challenges he's describing are similar to what Homotso is describing. So is it a governance issue or is it a land issue?
Well, it's both a government issue and a systematic issue. Like Homotso mentioned, that there are monopolies out there. It's not easy to enter into the markets. You might be given the land and you don't have resources, one. Or if you are lucky to have resources to plow and do all those activities, you won't be able to get the market out there because there are monopolies which are gatekeeping the market for certain people. And those monopolies...
Tevi is nodding. You agree?
I'm agreeing.
Okay.
But it's not just for black against black people. It's also for small-scale white farmers. The big guys are trying to keep the small guys out.
No, that's incorrect. Most black people living here in Gauteng province. Most black people, they are selling in townships. They are selling in Soweto, they are selling in Alexandra, all those cheap houses. But the people who are actually selling big houses and making serious monies, they are selling in Sandton. And even sometimes when a black estate agent comes wanting to sell somebody's land and that person you find is a white person, they don't trust the black person. They don't give them the opportunity to sell their land until a white man arrives and then they start giving them what they call this permission to actually advertise and sell their property. Okay. So racism is something that we must not sugarcoat. We must agree that racism continues to exist in the property sector as a large, whether as a whole, whether it's in farming, whether it's in estate agent, whether it's in mining, everywhere. Racism continues to exist because what happened is that when we were given this freedom in 1994, we thought that we have achieved victory, but actually it was a strategic defeat because what happened is that they just gave us a parliament that we are able to sit there and go to the same toilet with the white person, but in actual reality, in terms of the system and how the operations of the economy run, they made sure that they will actually keep us until and we will continue to work for them until we die. A black person is born working for a white person until they die.
All right, but Kukuletu here is not working for a white person. You're working for yourself. So as a young, born-free... As a young, born-free who's trying to empower yourself in this sector, do these realities, are they real for you? Is this what you're going through?
Yes, 100%. I think I always tell my mom that it is so unfair how the amount of work that I believe that we put in here at the farm is never going to match what is out there at the moment. However, any money that we make goes back to the land. You know, we might own the land, but we still have to pay for the land. And if it comes either the land and, you know, the people, the workers, that they're still being small farmers trying to break and penetrate into a very big market is very, very tough and very difficult for us. And I think it can be very discouraging knowing how this is something that is not very open to everyone, and a lot of us are not very exposed to what is out there. Our knowledge on agriculture as the youth is very, very limited.
Okay, so for you, you see this as a way to level the playing field, to create that equity. All right, I want to hear from some people at the back. Any opinions on what we've been discussing so far?
This expropriation of land act, it's correct partially, but it does not speak to us, black people who are marginalized. Because all the inequalities that we face now, they come from us not owning the land. So it's correct that there must be expropriation of land without compensation. And the land must be given back to the black majority of this country. Tevi, yes, mentioned that there is crime. Every time when he speaks, he deviates with the crime. And he forgets that the crime, it comes from people not owning anything, because if all of us were equal, there was no one that was going to bother entering someone's room and want to steal a cabbage. For instance, we can all be equal and we own our own land, then we farm. We can be able to defeat crime.
Okay. Let me hear from you, please.
With land expropriation, I believe that I will be able to access the land, be able to produce food and enhance food security at a household level.
I believe the Land Act or the Land Expropriation Act, if it could be passed and more people are open to owning land or owning as much land as they can and being equipped and being skilled with enough to be able to work the land, I believe the markets can be as well be open and be welcoming to us now that now we as the majority of the people in South Africa, we now have the land, we now are able to produce, we are able to feed the country. Now it is going to be much easier. So I do support the Act.
Because I think we've addressed the challenges really well, I'd like to hear some solutions, right? Because I think we can all agree that there's a serious land distribution problem in this country. How do we have access to the land? How do we make it productive and still feel like we're privately owning it? Some solutions, please. Anyone? Yeah.
I think you should put it maybe a little bit differently. Ask the question in 1980. There was 127,000 white farmers in South Africa that was farming the land. Today there's 27,500 left, and that number is falling. They say within the next number of years it's going to be 20,000. Now the reason of that wasn't because of the government or expropriation or anything. It was because of the farming industry being so difficult. It is extremely difficult. I have to tell you, a lot of farmers are just going bankrupt. And then it's really good farmers. So for those that are still here, they're exceptional farmers. But the question is, why are they going bankrupt? And if a white commercial farmer that has a history, that has all the knowledge, goes bankrupt, what chance do a young black farmer that has just received land have to make it a success? So we need to ask, for the very same reason that white farmers go bankrupt, young black farmers or black farmers don't succeed. It's the same thing. It's for the same reason. So you need to ask yourself, why is that?
All right. Some solutions, please.
Yes. I think the solution is to firstly make sure that the government start making more programs available for black people, if I would say, but mainly, especially the youth, and this problem must not start when someone complete their degrees and then they don't know.
Actually, tell us by example, because you're doing that. You're training young black people here and empowering them.
Yes, so I think there must be a progression process in that, so that people don't go and join farms because there's a stipend involved. People must go to the farms to join the farm because they see themselves as future farmers. But it mustn't end there. The government must help us and make more awareness programs that entice the youth to say, when I'm done through my, could it be an internship or whatever, what is the next step for me? I think that is very blurry. And it starts from the crash, primary school, where there is a respect for land and a respect for the Constitution in terms of the right to food. Yeah. There's no way everyone can have access to food when some people eat and others are not eating. There's no way crime will go down. However, when South Africans start working together, where we have South African producers, we must just stop this black and white thing, because at the end of the day, we really need to eat, all of us. If corruption can be reduced and resources be given to those that qualify and those that are very committed and have it within, because being a farmer, there's also a bit of a calling. Let us entice agriculture amongst the youth and to make sure that the future, because the youth is the future farmers of the country, the future producers of our country, they start now. Not when we are all gone,
Okay, Makoni, you had a solution for me.
Indeed. So the Ministry of Human Settlements listed that two of the reasons why it is unable to distribute those title deeds is because of lack of bulk services, provision of bulk services. That would be things like water, roads, electricity. And secondly is the fact that government has not, as it is planned, formalized townships. So basically the government is withholding land from people because of its own failures. So if the government gets to those two things, there would be the distribution of those title deeds. And also the government is the third biggest owner of land in this country. About 24% more is held in trust. Some of that are tribal trusts. Tribal trusts are land that's held in trust that are administered by chiefs, which are basically government administrators. If the government removes that land that it's holding and gives it to people, then I think there'd be a lot of less pointing at fingers at who's actually holding the land and who's gatekeeping.
Okay.
If the government did the right thing of giving that land away.
All right. Gugu, I'd like to give you a chance to close this debate for us. If you look at your projection 20 years from now, you're really incredibly young, 21, what do you want for this country, especially now as a young farmer?
I want for this country to be able to see how vast and broad that the agricultural industry really is, and how it is for everyone. You know, I really want to see myself in a space where I am just as successful as the next person from hard work and, you know, the dedication that I do have towards the industry. And I can only hope the same for everybody that we are training here at the farm, that every single person that leaves our space and leaves the environment with myself and my mother are seen to be doing something with themselves, so we can go back, 20 years down the line and see them also, having their own businesses, their own agricultural businesses, doing something, acquiring land as well and being given equal opportunities.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a brilliant space to end this conversation. It was really about expropriation. Will that resolve the land problem here in the country? I think everybody here says absolutely not, but it's definitely a good place to start the conversation. Thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.